Bruno Sammartino. His story reads like a Hollywood script. An immigrant from a small village in Italy who survived the German occupation during World War II to make it to the United States and eventually become one of the biggest icons in the history of professional wrestling. His fans idolized him. They lived and died by his wins and losses. His name echoed through the halls of Madison Square Garden. He became a living legend in the land of giants and will forever be remembered by wrestling fans young and old. As we hit the 8-year anniversary of his unfortunate passing in 2018, I am honored to be joined by author, podcaster, and lifelong fan Benny Scalla to discuss why Bruno truly was Uno. All right, everybody, welcome back to Wrestling with the 80s. This is an episode that I am pretty excited about. I've got a special guest this evening, and we're going to be talking about a topic that has long been needed to be covered on my channel. We're talking the greatest of all time, Bruno Sammartino, the living legend, and why Bruno was Uno. So, my special guest in this episode, as you can see on screen, is Benny the Playa Scalla. But, Benny, in honor of your... I guess, poetic laureate ability that you seem to have overtaken Lanny Poffo for that side of it. I've got a little intro for you that I've made sure rhymed, all right? So.
Oh, wow. Oh, geez. Yeah.
Bear with me, okay?
Oh, no, so, I love it.
Whether he's getting jacked or spinning wax, talking crime or traveling back in time, he's the man with appeal that talks about when it was real, a gentleman and a scholar, Benny the Playa Scalla. And welcome to the show, Benny.
That is Pulitzer Prize material.
I know, eh?
Thank you for that.
Want to make sure we got the spinning wax in there too, because not only are you
going to ask me for one, it's like, man, I got to think of one quick.
No, I took care of it. But yeah, I mean, not only a wrestling historian, a wrestling podcaster, writer, all that, but you're also DJ as well, eh?
I'm a DJ on Sundays at 3:00. Yes, sir.
And where can people find that?
It's live360.com, and then you just search for WANT. We got what you want. And yeah, nice. I've been doing it for about a little over a year now. I do a 2 or 3 hour show on Sunday, mostly like 60s, a little bit of 70s, every once in a while cross into the 80s. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. If anybody ever told me that I was going to do something like that, even 2 or 3 years ago, I would have told them they're crazy. But, you know, life has a lot of crazy twists and turns.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For anybody listening out there, I got introduced to Benny via a mutual companion of ours, Andy the Taxman from Grappling with Canada. We were able to do an episode together with Andy in regards to the passing of Hulk Hogan, and I've become just an absolute fan of Benny's work, and along with his partner Nikita Brezhnikov on When It Was Real on YouTube. And I implore you people out there, please go subscribe to Benny's podcast, because it's just actually, Benny, it's just your name as far as the actual podcast or the YouTube channel, correct?
The channel is called the Playa Entertainment Network. And then, you know, you on that, you will see When It Was Real, which we do on Wednesdays, and then True Crime, which I do on Monday nights. Yeah.
And then you're also doing stuff. Well, it was the WFIA podcast, but now it's the Twisted Turnbuckle, correct?
Yeah, I'm no longer affiliated with that, but I think they're going to relaunch that on a different channel.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll stick with your two shows, but you know, folks, you want to talk about wrestling history. I mean, this is what I love to talk about, is wrestling history, and I'm certainly covering the 80s period of wrestling, but what Benny and Nikita are doing is just amazing work, because you mentioned it off air. You're very lucky. Nikita is just such a great storyteller, and he has like a photographic memory for everything that he's
like Rain Man, the Rain Man of wrestling.
Yeah, and you're concentrating on the era of 1970 to 83, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, for fans that, you know, want to go in the Wayback Machine and relive that time, it's great. It's, you know, reviewing cards that were held, you know, either in Madison Square Garden or in the Spectrum or in Baltimore, because that's where Nikita's kind of stomping ground. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, we're going to do Boston Garden soon, Cap Center, you know, just those main venues on the East Coast.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, and one of the main topics and main wrestlers that comes up on those shows is the gentleman we're going to be talking about this evening, Bruno Sammartino. And the reason I think this is near and dear to Benny's heart, because he was your guy. He was your idol, wasn't he, when you were growing up as a wrestling fan?
From the moment I first saw him, which would have been around 1967, and yeah, just and it was so serendipitous. If you want me to tell a quick story, how so I lived. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Sandlot.
Yes.
I lived that movie. I mean, if it was a summer day, I was out playing ball. So I happened to walk into the house, and we, back then you only had one TV set, and it was typically in the living room. And for some reason, I don't know why, wrestling was on, and I didn't watch it, but it was on, and just at that moment, Ray Morgan, the old announcer from Capital Wrestling, was interviewing Bruno Sammartino, and I just watched him. And this guy, like, to me, looked like Superman. I mean, he's just like larger than life. And so at the end of the interview, which Ray Morgan would often do with Bruno, he said, Bruno, would you say a few words in Italian for your Italian fans? Well, my mom spoke fluent Italian, and my mom was in the kitchen. Well, my mom, I think she slept in the kitchen. She was always in the kitchen, making stuff. So I said, Mom, and she came out and said, can you translate this? So she translated it, and she said, Bruno said he wanted to thank his fans for always supporting him. And then she looked at me, she goes, that's a really classy guy. and that was my introduction to Bruno Sammartino. And here I am 59 years later, still talking about him. I mean, so obviously he made a great first impression on me.
Oh yeah. Truer words couldn't be spoken about him as well. That's the one thing that you pick up whenever you hear somebody talking about Bruno, when you watch him in interviews. Luckily we did get some interviews online with him, and just watching him when he's doing his promos through wrestling, just pure class all the way. And he brought the level of wrestling up a bit, compared to some of the wild men and stuff that we would see in the past and that. But yeah, he's got an amazing story, Benny. I hope that folks out there, if they haven't already checked out the history of Bruno Sammartino, that they'll take the time to do that. And that's my goal with this episode, is just to get people interested in the living legend Bruno Sammartino, and want to go back and check him out. And I mentioned it to you, he doesn't just have an impact on the 60s, the 70s, but he had a major impact on the 80s as well. And we'll get into that. But what a start to his life he had. I mean, just hearing him tell his stories about how his childhood was growing up. I mean, he came literally from Italy in the middle of World War II. And,
1950, yes, sir.
Yeah. And he literally was in a town that was occupied by the Nazi forces, and nearly lost his life and lost his entire family during World War II. The sacrifices that his mother made to make sure that the kids were safe. Meanwhile, his dad is over in America. He had gone to immigrated to Pittsburgh, to find work and to try to bring the family over there. And meanwhile, this is going back on in Italy. I couldn't imagine, as a parent myself, what that would have been like at that time. But his story, just the beginning of his life alone could be a Oscar-winning movie,
even just surviving. I mean, his family went up to the mountains. I think they called it Valla Rocca.
Yes,
and it was about a day and a half's walk from their house in Pittsburgh, which was Bruno's hometown. And then the mom, because she had in their basement had corn, wheat, potatoes, the staples for them, and the house was actually occupied by the Nazis, and she would walk down that mountain. And this is, she's got to be like, 40s, close to 50, walk down that mountain a day and a half. She'd come back. So like 3 days later with supplies for them. But I mean, there was a lot of times where Bruno said they ate dandelions or snow.
Yeah.
And he was very, very sick. He had rheumatic fever. And I mean, it's a miracle he even survived. And when he left the country to come to Pittsburgh, I think he was 83 pounds as a 14-year-old going on 15.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. My son is 14 years old as well. And I think when I heard that, and I heard him say 80 pounds, well, I think of what my son weighs, and he's a lean, mean fight machine, but he's definitely a lot more than that. So I couldn't imagine just, the condition of him when he arrived in the U.S. And really, he's seen his father for the first time. His father left when he was 3 months old.
Yep.
Unbelievable. So just an unbelievable story. And then he goes from being, 80 pounds and sickly to all of a sudden he gets interested thanks to friends, at his school that he was at. I mean, he tells a story about, being bullied at school and everything like that, but he gets introduced to weightlifting, something I know you're very familiar with as well. Oh, yeah. But he gets inspired by seeing, young men weightlifting at I think it was the local YMCA at the time.
It was the Hebrew equivalent, like the YMCA or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And just builds his body up in no time, naturally, I should add.
Right.
Yeah. He said there was a lot of prosciutto, I think it was, that helped him build up all the sandwiches.
His mom, because when he was working construction, his mom would pack him a lunch of like 17 sandwiches.
Yeah.
And I have an Italian mom. A sandwich isn't a little sandwich. A sandwich is like a sandwich.
Yeah. Built it up naturally. All of a sudden, as a young man, he's 275 pounds and setting records as far as weightlifting, bench pressing 565 pounds free, by the way, no straps.
That was incredible back then.
Unbelievable. And that's what gets him notoriety, and that's what gets him, I guess, linked to the wrestling business. So, Benny, you probably can shed some light on this, on his start in the wrestling business. It would have been in the Pittsburgh area.
Yeah, so what happened was he won a powerlifting contest, I think in Oklahoma, and the local Pirates announcer, Bob Prince, who I think, is one of the greatest announcers of baseball announcers of all time, did some kind of show and invited Bruno to, kind of replicate some of his feats of strength. And it just so happened, I think the gentleman's name was Rudy Miller, who worked for Vince McMahon at Capitol Wrestling, happened to see this show. And he let McMahon know, and I guess they called him that he went to DC for a tryout. And they offered him a job, and the way Bruno says it, it sounded like he was going to make a lot of money. Now, he had just gotten married, I think, in 1959, which was the year he started. And even then, like the payouts he was getting, $25, $15. Yeah, it was a little bit different back then, but it still wasn't much money. And Bruno's having to, pay for gas and food and maybe a hotel if he's a little bit far away where he can't drive home. And he was starving, and eventually he went up. It's a long story. He was suspended, blackballed by Vince Sr. because he supposedly no-showed, which he was double booked that night. And he kept one of the bookings, but he wasn't told of the other one. But he wound up going home and doing construction again.
Yeah. It's an interesting story. I think most people just figure, okay, Bruno came to the WWWF at that time, made it big, and became the champion, had the historic run. But it's quite to talk about a made-for-TV movie. It's quite the story. He was, frustrated with the fact that Buddy Rogers was the champion, and Bruno wanted to have that belt and wanted to have that spot, and wasn't getting that from the McMahons. Decides he's going to, as you said, he's going to go elsewhere. And an interesting move, not surprising from the promoters at that time. And he said himself in an interview that he was a little naive to how well the promoters knew each other and worked together, because everywhere as he went in the United States, he was blackballed. He could not get a booking. He was quote unquote suspended all over the country. So where does he go? Ironically enough, I'm located in Nova Scotia myself, so I'm Canadian. So he comes up to Canada, after, as you mentioned, going home and being a construction worker. But he comes to Canada, Frank Tunney's promotion in Toronto. Smart move. Toronto's well known as a very similar to New York, a very a lot of immigrants and a big Italian community. And he was smart this time. He's told the story about how he did some self-promotion leading up to that, and getting some newscasters and doing some feats of strength to the point that he was called the Italian Samson going up to Toronto. And he really caught on there. Any thoughts on his run in Canada? Because he was not only Toronto, but Montreal, which again, very big Italian community in Montreal as well. He did shots in Winnipeg and different things. Even had a couple of matches with Lou Thez for the NWA World Title. So any thoughts on that run for him?
Well, yeah, I mean, he spoke very, very highly in his book of Mr. Tunney, how, when nobody would give him a chance, he did. And I guess when he first met Mr. Tunney, he said, "You're probably going to hear some things, and all I ask is that you judge me by what I do here." And, after a few months, I guess Frank Tunney invited him to dinner, and he said, I just want to let you know, I did hear things, but, you've been phenomenal here. And he, like you said, he booked him everywhere. I mean, he booked him, out in Winnipeg and I guess Edmonton, places like that. And he did like you said, he did a really good job of getting himself over. He got smart,
Yeah.
And he, as far as he was concerned, that was his home. I guess it was rough because he had a young wife in Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
and it was very tough. I guess he took on I'm not sure exactly, but he got a bus to Buffalo, and somehow he got a flight to Pittsburgh, but he was only home 2 weekends a month, which that's kind of tough when you're starting a family, just get married. But he was doing it, he was making some good money. And then apparently Buddy Rogers wasn't doing that well, and he got the call from McMahon, which, according to what he said, he didn't answer for a couple of weeks. He said, I guess Vince McMahon wanted him to call Vince Sr., and he said, "I'm not going to call him. He can call me." And Bruno,
yeah.
Italians can be hard-headed, and Bruno was hard-headed.
Well, and I mean, he as you say, he was making a name for himself in Canada and getting booked for sure. Absolutely. I think he mentioned too, he may have done some shots for Stu Hart up in Calgary as well. So
yeah, I believe so.
I mean, so countrywide, he was popular. I don't know. I've never checked. I wonder if he's ever come down to the Maritimes. We had a thriving wrestling scene here in the Maritimes as well, but yeah, I mean, and he was wrestling legends, Canadian wrestling legends as well. I mean, he won tag team titles with Whipper Billy Watson. He had great feuds with Sweet Daddy Siki. He was a star here before he even made that eclipse, that climbed that mountain in America, which was very cool to hear that he had that start. But you brought it up, Benny. I mean, he gets the call and finally decides to go back to the WWWF New York, area to fight Buddy Rogers for the title. So now you can tell the story, but there's a lot of I guess stories around the condition of Buddy Rogers at this time. I know Bruno has an opinion on it, Buddy Rogers had an opinion on it, but what was the lead up to his match with Buddy Rogers, this historic match?
When Vince first called him, he offered him, I think, like $500 a week, which in 1963 is really good money.
Yeah.
And Bruno said no. And he, I guess McMahon upped the ante to like $750. He said no. He said, "Well, what will it take for you to come back?" He said, I want Buddy Rogers in the ring for the title. And that's how it was arranged. But yeah, Rogers, and the way Bruno tells it, Rogers went out one night, I guess it was in Pittsburgh, and he saw the crowd, which was very, slim. Mm-hmm. And he complained of chest pains. I guess he didn't want to he didn't want to wrestle. But according to Bruno, he wrestled right up to that match, and then he wrestled afterwards. And the thing is, back then the wrestling was controlled by the state athletic commissions, and you're not gonna go out, right? The doctor's not gonna clear you, unless you pass a physical. So if he was really that bad, you would have thought he would have flunked it.
Well, I think I read that Buddy Rogers and Bruno had a tag team match against each other shortly after Bruno won the title from him. So it's if there was chest pains or a heart attack or whatever, it wasn't as evident if that's the case.
Yeah, ironically, Buddy wrestled when he was when he wrestled with Jimmy Snuka, he was close to 70, I think.
He still looked the same, though.
He looked great. I mean, he was always in good condition. And Bruno even said, he really took care of himself. But yeah, Bruno told me, because I literally sitting 7 feet away from him, he told me that Buddy thought that Bruno was paid off that night.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruno said, "What you heard isn't true." He said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." And it obviously didn't take long.
Yeah, 48 seconds. That's all it took. Yeah, he tells a story. He said, "Forget the deal. You try your hardest, buddy." And
You do your best, and I'm going to do my best.
yeah, yeah. Gets him up in a bear hug and then into the backbreaker and says, "I'm going to break your back, or if you don't quit." And Buddy made the right choice in that case.
And Bruno, I mean, he literally was a gorilla. Buddy Rogers wouldn't have stood. I mean, even though Buddy Rogers was in good shape, he wouldn't have stood a chance against Bruno.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, Benny, because I'm trying to put in perspective. I put some photos up on here as well of Bruno in his prime. But for fans that are used to today's wrestling or the 80s wrestling, when everybody was a bodybuilder and it was chemically enhanced, but Bruno was all natural. But for his physique to come along at that time, and I mean, I'm sure that's one of the things that actually attracted you as far as just the wow factor with him. But for his physique at the time, that was rare, was it not, in that era of wrestling?
To have that kind of muscle mass. I mean, at one point, Bruno was a competitive bodybuilder before he got into wrestling.
Yeah.
And he had a little bit of it, more of a bodybuilder physique. But by the time he broke into wrestling, he had bulked up. But he just, I mean, the chest and the shoulders, the upper body was just so massive. No, you never really saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so when you talk about what made Bruno a star and what really, because his fans were not just fans, they idolized them. They just absolutely, were just rabid for Bruno. What was it that, for you, in your eyes, what was it that made him the star that he was?
I really think it was how he conducted himself. It was a joke that back in the 60s, Italians had 3 pictures over their mantle. One was the Pope, one was Jesus Christ, and the other one was Bruno. And he had that mystique. And I really, truly believe, even when I met him, that I don't think he had any idea why people loved him so much. He was just being himself. But he was just, I guess, coming from such humble beginnings and, almost dying before he even came to America and earning everything that he got. Nothing was handed to him. I think he just really, really appreciated what he got in life. And I guess he wanted to pay it forward. He never was too busy for a fan. And to me, just his humility and his grace and how he conducted himself, both inside and outside the ring, was what did it for me.
Yeah. And I mean, he, just a gentleman at all times, but always in the ring, a powerhouse and somebody who could just, do some amazing feats. So that's going to be attractive too, because I mean, as you said, he wasn't the common guy. Like, you didn't see this all the time. And with the feats of strength, I was listening to a story that he was telling about early in his career. He kind of got himself into a bit of a shoot with Haystacks Calhoun because he had made the comment that, he could body slam Haystacks Calhoun. So they, at the time, Haystacks Calhoun, for people that aren't familiar, I think was being billed around 605 pounds. And, and he was a phenom himself. I mean, he was one of the original giant phenoms, of before Andre came around. And so they ended up booking the match, and lo and behold, Bruno body slams him. And the fans and the press were saying, they inflate the weight and stuff like that for wrestling, and they got a scale in, and it turned out when they weighed Haystacks, he was actually 625. So,
right. Yeah.
I mean, that's just insane. It's one thing to deadlift a barbell for that weight, but for a human being, just to pick him up and body slam, just amazing
and from all accounts, Haystacks was not a willing participant. So
that's right.
It'd be one thing if he helped, most times you get an assist when you're doing a body slam. He didn't want to go up because that took a lot from his allure of being lifted off his feet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just unreal. But so Bruno, wins the title in 63. He held the title to 1971, a total of 2,803 days, which is just mind-boggling. Pretty much 8 years on the nose, pretty close. And we hear everything today about Roman Reigns and his title reign and stuff like that, and how he was, approaching the records of Hogan and Backlund and all this. There was no record. The record is Bruno Sammartino. He was number one. That was it. But you're becoming a wrestling fan midway through that reign, and the majority of the time that he's champion, he's main eventing Madison Square Garden. Benny, can you touch on a little bit for the fans unfamiliar? What was the importance of Madison Square Garden in the wrestling circle at that point in time?
It was the mecca of wrestling. It was the place. And the WWWF, Vince McMahon Sr., that was his cash cow. I think he made more money from the Garden every month than he made from all the other arenas put together. Right. And Bruno, he knew that if it didn't sell out, it was going to be pretty darn close. But I mean, when you think about it, for somebody who became champion in May of 1963, and he held the title until April of 77, right? Yeah. April 30th, 77 is when he lost to Billy Graham. Yeah. And so you're talking about like a good, 14 years. And, of course, he had the hiatus when Pedro was a champion. But to be like even 14 years later, where you're still selling out that same venue month after month after month. And Vince McMahon was not a dummy. I mean, it was the very simple formula. He brought in a new heel, and it was from another territory. And back then, we didn't know who these people were because we didn't have cable TV. And I guess if you read the magazines, you might be able to recognize somebody. But I'll give you a quick example. They brought on a guy named Rocky Fitzpatrick, and he tore through everybody. And typically the match before anybody would face Bruno, they would either attack Arnold Skolin on TV, or they would beat usually like Dominic DeNucci or whoever the number 2 babyface was. Right. And so he did all that. Invincible, faces Bruno beats him, and then it works his way down the card. And that was actually Bob Orton Sr., Rocky Fitzpatrick.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that they just, for the better part of 14 years, bring in a new heel. He works his way up the card, squashes, either Arnold Skolin or whoever Bruno's ally was, and then gets his match with Bruno. And depending on how much the intrigue was, like guys like George Steele or Tanaka, they would sometimes headline the Garden more than once. Yeah. One of my favorite wrestlers, Baron Mikkel Cicluna, who I wrote a story about, actually, and a lot of people, if you read Facebook, he was a jobber. Well, maybe at the end he was putting people over, but he was like 53 years old. What people don't realize is in January of 1966, he headlined the Garden with Bruno, and the match went 28 minutes. And Cicluna actually had Bruno in his hangman's hold, which was Cicluna. And Bruno kicked the referee trying to get out of it, and the referee disqualified Cicluna. So, I mean, he was that big of a deal, but they worked him, it never got old. People never got tired of seeing Bruno. I mean, the variety was his opponent, but it was a winning formula, but the end result was always the Garden. Everything was directed towards the Garden.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. That actually brings up a question I was going to ask later, but let's touch on this. Like, some of Bruno's opponents, who would you consider to be Bruno's greatest opponents, greatest foes, greatest feuds through his runs?
Man, there were so many. I tell you, there's the guys that I was afraid of, like as a kid, was George Steele, Professor Tanaka, and Killer Kowalski. And I was, in fact, my very first show in April of 1968, the main event was Bruno and Toru Tanaka at the Island Garden in Hempstead. And I was legitimately, I mean, the name of our show was When It Was Real. Wrestling was very real to me back then. Yeah. And I was terrified that I'm going to be here tonight and, my hero is going to lose his title. And I mean, thankfully it didn't work out that way. But I would say those. I mean, he had so many: George Steele, Tanaka, Kowalski. A big foe of his in his first reign was Waldo von Erich. Right. Mm-hmm. And he came back. Yeah, came Walter Sieber, right, from Canada, and came back later, I think in 75, to face Bruno one more time. He was gone for about 9 years. Bulldog Brower was one of his first and then in his second reign, then you had like Bobby Duncombe, Stan Hansen, you had Spiros Arion, who, to me, Nikita and I were talking about this on Wednesday. I think that was one of the greatest heel turns ever. The Golden Greek, who was, Bruno's friend when I first started watching wrestling in 1968. He was actually the number 2 babyface in the WWWF. And, of course, he turned on Chief Jay because everybody turned on Chief Jay. And then he, he had an epic feud with Bruno, came back a few years later and did it with Backlund.
Yeah, I love the comment that you made in your episode. You talked about the difference between the heel turn with Spiros Arion versus the heel turn with Larry Zbyszko. And you said that the fans were angry at Larry Zbyszko for what he did to Bruno, but the fans were afraid of what Spiros was going to do to Bruno, i.e. take the title off him.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. I'm glad it made sense because to me, like, again, watching wrestling in the late 60s, Arion was going over guys like Hans Mortier, Cicluna, Monsoon. He was getting wins over those guys. He didn't lose too many matches. So when he came back, I'm thinking, like, this is a guy that, like, to me was almost on the same level as Bruno, where, Zbyszko was more like, how could you do this? But I didn't really take him seriously. He was Bruno's, Bruno's protege, but he wasn't on Bruno. In my mind, he was never going to be on Bruno's level. So we watched those matches more so Bruno could exact revenge. Yeah. Whereas with a guy like Arion, we're making sure, or even like an Ernie Ladd, somebody like that, we're worried that Bruno could possibly lose his title.
Yeah, it's it was a great way to put it. I really like that, and to put it in perspective for fans, like the way it seemed to work back then was you had as you mentioned, that number 2 babyface that was almost the guy that the heel had to get through in order to get to Bruno. So they were so important because they set up that heel and made him look strong to be ready for Bruno. You mentioned Spiros Arion and until the turn, which I have seen the 8mm of that heel turn, and there's no sound or anything like that, but just him turning on Jay Strongbow. But there's another guy I want to talk to you about, because I know you're a fan of Chief Jay Strongbow, and if you're a modern wrestling fan, kind of the I hate to say it, the image that you get is like he was just one of the guys, the guys in the back that was kind of a stooge or something like that, right? But Chief Jay Strongbow, and I love how you and Nikita talk about it. He was massively over in New York, and just he was the eventual number 2 heel as well.
He showed up in 1970, I think it was, and it's funny. I think he had wrestled Jack Briscoe in Florida as Joe Scarpa for the NWA Championship like a week before that. Shows up in New York as Chief Jay Strongbow, and he very quickly worked his way up to the number 2 babyface slot. Danucci had it. Victor Rivera, who was a great talent, had it for a while. But Chief was the man for many, many years. You got, you wanted to get to Bruno, you had to get past the Chief, and that wasn't an easy thing to do. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, what was the appeal of Chief? Like, what was it that just got the fan? Because they were like, I watched some of the old MSG stuff, and I mean, the fans loved him. Oh, just the whole Indian thing, and it's so ironic. He was an Italian guy from Nutley, New Jersey, but he really embraced it. I mean, even you see him in his later years, he was dressed up, in Native American stuff. He really embraced the gimmick, but I think he took it to heart so much that people really, again, we believed these guys were so good at what I never would have thought. It's like I never would have thought Ivan Koloff was a guy from Montreal named Oriol Paris. Like, to me, he was Ivan Koloff. Waldo von Erich was from Germany, Stuttgart. I think they built him from. I didn't know he was Walter Cyber from. I'm not sure where he was from in Canada, but these guys
Winnipeg or something. Yeah,
I think so. These guys and Chief his comebacks. He would, before there was hulking up. It was Chief on the Warpath. I mean, he'd be getting clubbed, just slowly, and then he started like doing the dance. Once he started doing the dance, it was over, because then a couple of knee lifts, in a couple of chops, maybe the sleeper hold, and the match was over.
You know, another person that you're well connected to as well, that became an opponent of Bruno's. Fans of the 80s would know him as the partner of the Iron Sheik, but Nikolai Volkoff, of course, there's a connection there with your co-host Nikita. But Nikolai was another guy that, I don't know, I'm just going by from what I hear, but it seemed like he was one of those guys that kind of made you afraid he could take the title from Bruno as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, it was as Beppo Mongol when he was like 19 or 20. The Mongols were the first tag team I ever saw, and they just scared the crap out of me. And they were pretty much unbeatable. But Nikolai was Beppo Mongol, and he actually pinned Bruno at like 20 years old. And I remember Ray Morgan made a very big deal of it, that Bruno actually, even though it was a tag match, because Bruno would rarely if ever got pinned, and definitely not in singles competition, but just to build these guys up. But yeah, Nikolai worked with Bruno several times, and Bruno told Nikita that he thought that Nikolai, as far as strength, was very close to him.
Yeah,
really strong man, but the polar opposite in real life, just a gentle giant.
Yeah, I love the stories you talk about when he was trying to box and just didn't have that killer instinct in him.
Well, he became a housing inspector in Baltimore County. In fact, that's the article. I'm writing an article called After the Ring, and it's going to be about, what wrestlers did after they hung up the tights and the boots. And Nikolai became a housing inspector in Baltimore County, Maryland. And, a lot of these guys, because I worked for the government down here, some of these guys are real jerks. They just get people citations so they can collect money. If Nikolai saw an elderly person that had, their grass was too high, he'd mow it for him. That's the kind of guy that he was.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Is that article for Pro Wrestling Stories?
Yes.
Yeah, we should give a shout out to Pro Wrestling Stories as well, because people can find your articles there.
Absolutely. My JP Zarka, who I love dearly, I call him my ambassador of Quan. He is the chief editor and actually the owner of the Pro Wrestling Stories website. I think I have 37 published stories. And I'm working on. I haven't done one in a while since I really got heavy duty into podcasting. I was initially a writer who did podcasting. Now I'm a podcaster who does occasional writing.
Do you have any books or anything like that?
No. That's something I've thought about. No, it's just I pretty much have stayed in the short story realm.
Yeah,
but it's not. The thing with these wrestling books, if you're going to do one, you pretty much have to resign yourself to the fact you're not going to make any money doing it. But I that wouldn't really matter to me anyway. If I could do a book about a wrestler, some people call it like a vanity project. To me, it wouldn't be a vanity project. It would be more like, this is my contribution to the history of wrestling. And
exactly.
Because it's very important that we keep this stuff alive.
Yeah, that's the way I look at this channel. It's like my tribute or my thank you to these people for entertaining me for so long, right? And
absolutely,
you just want to make sure people don't get forgotten is the biggest thing.
No, it's almost like like you thank a veteran for their service. I tell Davey O'Hannon and Johnny Rods all the time, I want to thank you because you guys entertain me, and I bet there were times when you were hurting, or you had 103, fever. But you went out there because, well, number one, you had to. There was no PTO in professional wrestling.
Yeah,
you don't work. You're not getting paid. You have a family back home with bills, but that there was times when they were hurting and aching, and they or they were missing their kid's birthday or their wedding anniversary or something, and they just did it, week after week, month after month. It's funny you mentioned Roman Reigns. I think in the 4 years he was champion, he might have wrestled 50 times.
Right.
And Bruno would do that in 2 months. Easy.
Yeah. And sold them all out.
Right. Exactly.
That's the other side of it. Yeah. Wanted to touch on, as you mentioned, you mentioned Spiros Arion as one of his greatest opponents. A couple others that come to mind, and it ties into something else I wanted to talk about, was the Shea Stadium series. And so, of course, I guess the first one 1972. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that is correct.
That was when Pedro and Bruno had their 75-minute draw, correct?
75 minutes. It was an hour, 15 minutes.
Yeah, so let's get there. So Bruno drops the title to Ivan Koloff in 1971. Again, just an absolute shock. Well, let me ask you. You obviously were watching at the time. What was the feeling for you when he dropped the title to Ivan Koloff?
I remember, we would get the New York Daily News and Newsday delivered to my house. One was in the morning, one was in the afternoon. And for the life of me, I can't remember which one of them had the article. But when I saw it, I mean, if it said that Ivan Koloff had defeated Bruno Sammartino last night at Madison Square Garden to win the world championship, if there was an article about a flood killing 2 million people, I would have just shuffled by it and kept reading the article. I mean, that's how much it meant to me. And I was in utter shock because Ivan wasn't a guy that, really had made that much of a name for himself up until that point, at least on the East Coast. He had been there before, but I didn't really look at him as a threat. But man, oh man, yeah, that was a shocker. I mean, I was crushed. My world, it really put a dent in my world, put it that way. And Pedro was a good champion. I liked Pedro, but to me, like, people didn't feel the same way about Pedro as they did about Bruno. Bruno was just like a once in a generation person.
Yeah. Now, Benny, I understand why they would have went with Pedro, because obviously, again, you're playing into the population of New York.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
He was obviously extremely popular, and of course, with the Puerto Rican fans and the Spanish fans, I mean, he's a hero for them. But when I see how much heat that Ivan Koloff got for his win, and you've had the pleasure of talking to the Koloff family as well on your show.
Great people.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Do you think that maybe they jumped the gun a bit too soon, taking it off of Ivan Koloff? Do you think there was something there? Or I've heard stories as well. I mean, obviously there was a lot of heat. I mean, at the time they talked about in the arena, it was just deadly silent to the point that Bruno thought he lost his hearing due to the finishing move. But what are your thoughts on, should Ivan have had a longer run with that title?
If you ask my opinion, I would say absolutely yes, because here's the thing. For the better part of 8 years, if you're a babyface, you're not getting a title shot with Bruno. So now, to me, like, if you keep the belt on Ivan, even if you did it like superstar Billy Graham for 9 or 10 months, because at that point you're not really a transitional champion anymore. You're a champion. And all the the guys like the Riveras and the Monsoons and all those guys who would never get a shot, or even the Chief at Bruno, now you could, I mean, what rivalries you could have had, what booking. And I think Ivan he had enough heat that he could, and plus he had Captain Lou.
Yes.
He could definitely have carried the ball. I mean, I really believe that. I just don't think. I think there's a couple of factors. I think Vince McMahon Sr. was too set in his ways,
right?
And he wanted that ethnic champion. And number two, I mean, you have to consider too that we were still in the Cold War with Russia. And I think that might have had, I mean, I'm not really a historian, but looking back, maybe that had an influence on his decision as well. But do I think Ivan could have been a good, even like 1 year champion? Absolutely, yes. You could have had so many good rivalries that, of the guys who, just working with Bruno were never going to, if they were Bruno's friend, they were baby faces, they weren't going to get a shot. With Ivan, they would have gotten a shot. And that's what happened with Superstar, and it worked great.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's something that people forget. You touched on a few great things there. Number one, add to the heat of the fact that he's the man that beats Bruno Sammartino 8 years after he won the title. But you have the Cold War going on, and then the feelings for Russia. I mean, you could say, well, it's kind of like today, but it's not even close. Like back in the 70s and 60s and 50s. I mean, you had the communism scare, the Red Scare, all that stuff. So I mean, he had just built in storyline after storyline. And what people maybe don't realize about that time, that was your only title. Aside from tag team titles, that was your only title. It's not like you had your baby faces who could go after the Intercontinental title or the U.S. title or anything like this. It's the world title. So pretty tough to be a baby face back then when you're not getting a title shot against Bruno. So you've got 8 years that you're waiting for your chance to have that match in the main event, right? I mean, it's the main event money. You would think that they want to have a run for, say, like a Jay Strongbow to get a shot at at the title, like you mentioned, Gorilla Monsoon and Victor Rivera and guys like that. So it's interesting if you could go back in time and do that. But I understand why he liked the ethnic hero. And I mean, even Hulk Hogan, the reason he was called Hulk Hogan is because he wanted to sound Irish, right? So he's playing into, again, the population stuff. So it's,
and a lot of the guys who, like Dominic DeNucci,
right.
People, again, another one that people call a jobber, but you don't realize Dominic DeNucci in the mid 60s was the Australian version of Bruno. And I think the name of the promotion was WCW, World Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, it was Jim Burnett's, wasn't it?
The belt was called the IWA, and he won it like 4 or 5 times. 2 of the guys he beat for the title were Killer Kowalski and Ray Stevens, who were easily like top 10 in the world back then. So he left. A lot of the guys, Rivera, when he left, he won belts everywhere. But yeah, I mean, you could not, like, you couldn't homestead as a babyface, in the, on the East Coast. If you did, I mean, you're going to make a nice living, but you just weren't going to win any championships.
Well, as you mentioned, being the number 2 guy is okay, so because you're that semi-main events thing, but for some guy trying to make a name for himself, a little tough at that point.
Yeah, you got to, and thank God for the territories, because you could go make a name for yourself and maybe come back as a star later on.
That's why I believe we need something like that back today, to be quite honest, so guys can freshen up. I mean, you're just getting overkill with some of the guys that you see nowadays. It just a thought that came to mind too, Benny. I know you mentioned that in the past with your show. I mean, obviously Pedro was a great champion, but you said, I think both you and Nikita have said that Victor Rivera could have been easily in that Pedro spot. But was Spiros Arion there at that time in 71 when Pedro won the title?
No. He was gone by then. He was gone, I think, from like 68 to 74. Spiros was he was a funny kind of guy. Like, he'd wrestle for a year or two, then he'd go maybe to Europe. He didn't wrestle, like, he didn't do the territory circuit. I think he worked in California for a few months, and I think he worked in Canada for a few months, and I think he did a couple of Japan tours, but then he worked overseas. He didn't wrestle, his career. He doesn't have that many matches. But Rivera, if Victor was a different kind of personality, I thought Victor was a much, much better wrestler than Pedro. Right. Very talented guy. But he was a wild card. He was he left in mid 75 to go to the new IWA while he was tag team champion with Dominic DeNucci.
Right.
And they had to replace him with Pat Barrett. But I think if he was more of a company man, absolutely, he would have been the guy.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we get Pedro as champion. It was about 2-year run for him. And then obviously Bruno's coming back, and, depending on who you believe with the stories, Pedro was doing well locally, but maybe not as well across the country in that. And of course, there's also rumors that maybe the fans were a bit too lively for Pedro as far as the heels. And, you talk about the Blackjack Mulligan story about him getting stabbed and stuff like that. But the man who took the title off of Pedro Morales was Stan Stasiak. What was your thoughts when Stan Stasiak ends up winning the title from Pedro? Was this another shocker? Was it something that you knew, okay, well, here we go, we're putting it on Bruno shortly? What was your feeling?
No, I had no idea. To me, when they announced that Stasiak was the champion, it's like, wow, because Koloff only held the title for 3 weeks, but that was a few years earlier, and there was no track record. There was the term transitional champion didn't exist back then. Right. So as far as I knew, he was going to be the champion, but lo and behold, Bruno came back, and I think it was 9 days later. I think Pedro lost the title December 1st, and Bruno won it on December the 10th. I think I have my facts right.
Yeah, I think it was December. I had it written down.
Pedro lost
December the 10th. Yeah, it was December the 10th. Yeah, and he ends up holding it. Oh, go ahead, Benny.
Yeah, Pedro was a great draw in New York, but not so, and a very solid draw in Philly. But then, like, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Boston, not so much.
Right.
So they were kind of faltering, and so they cut a deal with Bruno. But Bruno said, look, man, because if you look, there's a website that I use for my research called WrestlingData.com.
Right.
You can look up any wrestler. It'll tell you, like, his entire history of matches, etc. And you look at Bruno was a solid between 250 and 300 matches a year in his first run. And you look in his second run, and he's maybe 100 matches a year. Now he's just working he's not working the Jaffa Mosque in Pennsylvania, the 3,000 seat venue, or he's not working the little, the spot shows at a high school. He's just working, the Boston Gardens, the Philly Spectrums, the Pittsburgh Civic Center, those kind of, the main venues. So he did it right. And he said, if I had done that the first time, I probably never would have, asked to give the belt up.
Yeah.
The reason why he asked to give it up because he was, working the 300 nights a year. And I mean, that's taking a toll on your body. I don't care, like, how short your matches are. I mean, he was hurting and he missed his family. It was the right thing for him to do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure they would have just kept it on him right until 1980, probably, if they could have.
I honestly do believe that if Bruno, when he won the belt from Buddy Rogers, if he decided that's what he wanted to do, he would have had the belt at least until 1980. I mean, he could have been conceivably, until Vince Jr. bought the company, because he could have still been the guy.
Yeah, it's just amazing to think of. I know I don't know if you're a Jim Cornette fan or not, but I have his book, The Heroes and Friends, Bruno in there, and he talks about Bruno's deal for the second run, and it was at the time it was unheard of. It was record setting as far as the deal that they had made with him, as far as the dates he was working, he was getting percentages of the gates, different things like that, and this, arguably from a financial standpoint, not just for him but for the company too, was probably one of the greatest financial times for the company as far as the money they were making, the gates they were making. I know that's all you hear about in modern day is, we set a record for the amount of money we made for this show, but really it's only because you charged absolutely ridiculous prices for the tickets, right? But he's drawn 30-something thousand fans to Shea Stadium, so that's kind of where we're going into. I'll ask this question. I was going to go somewhere else, but I'll ask this question for you. Comparing run number 1, the 8-year run, versus run number 2, which do you have a favorite or anything like that? Do you have one that you prefer?
Yeah, I like the first one. I guess because I was younger and more impressionable. Yeah, and the real factor was way, way more intense back then. Right. And I always liked when Bruno, his Italian backbreaker, his finisher, he would use. But I mean, after a while, the toll wore on his back. And his second run, he would either use the bear hug, or he'd win some other way. He wouldn't use the backbreaker anymore. And he just, I mean, he was, not that he slowed down. I mean, he still looked great. Actually, he'd slimmed down a bit. Yes. And he was, a little bit quicker. The matches were still great, but again, just because of the fact that, like, when I started watching wrestling, that was right in the peak of Bruno's first reign.
Right. Yeah. So in '76, we get our next Shea Stadium show, and a lot of stories around that. I mean, that was one that Vince McMahon Sr. had co-promoted with Bob Arum, the boxing promoter. They were going to have a pay-per-view spectacle, one of the first times they were going to have this, closed circuit television, all that stuff. The headline was supposed to be Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki for the was it? No, sorry, it was Giant Baba, wasn't it? It was Inoki, right?
It was Ali Inoki.
Ali Inoki. Boxer versus wrestler match that they thought was going to be the big draw, but it wasn't drawing that well because people either weren't sure about the legitimacy of it, they weren't familiar with Inoki, that kind of stuff. But what saved this show is interesting because it's a match between Bruno and Stan Hansen. That was a revenge match, steel cage match. But what was the reason that Bruno was getting revenge on Stan Hansen, Benny?
Well, 2 months, and it was, 2 months before this is when Bruno broke his neck at the Garden, and I think it was April 26th. And they always attributed it to the lariat, because they wanted to put that lariat over as a brutal, finishing maneuver. But in reality, Hansen had scooped Bruno up for a body slam, and just, Bruno landed the wrong way. So, I mean, Bruno didn't want to worry his parents. So he flew back to Pittsburgh so he could be cared for there. He said that flight was like absolute murder. You imagine flying with a broken neck, and he's in the hospital convalescing. And it's funny because I actually wrote one of the stories I wrote for Pro Wrestling Stories was called Showdown at Shea. Right. And I covered all three of them. But Bruno's doctor is Louis Cibatrice, I think his name was. And McMahon called Bruno saying, Bruno, I need you. Like, and Bruno's lying in the hospital with a broken neck, doesn't even know if he's even going to be able to walk again. And the doctor actually grabbed the phone and ripped McMahon a new a-hole. It's like, do you understand? This man has a broken neck. We have no idea what his condition's going to be, blah, blah, blah. He said, but McMahon just kept calling. And he said, if you can't do this show, we may, the whole company may fold, because McMahon had really gone heavy duty, I guess, into the closed circuit. He had invested into that. And like you said, the match between Ali and Inoki was laying an egg. People just weren't interested. Nobody really knew, back then, I didn't know who Antonio Inoki was. Right. So why would I pay to see him, Ali fight him?
Yeah, and I mean, it's for fans today who are so used to watching New Japan Pro Wrestling on some streaming app or something like that. That wasn't the way it was back then, right?
No, it was very limited. Pretty much that was the onset of cable. So cable was just coming into the picture, but pretty much it was the magazines, or you subscribe to a newsletter. So Inoki was an unknown quantity, and it was Bruno and Hansen. If that match did not take place. And, Bruno was told, look, you'll be protected. But, I've seen the match, and, he went at it pretty hard with Hansen. Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think, and supposedly Bruno did not get the payoff that he was promised for that match, which is, to me, that's awful. You literally saved the company.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that kind of plays into, Benny, have you ever watched the Bruno documentary that the WWE did? Basically, it was around him entering the Hall of Fame, the reconciliation, that type of stuff. Have you ever seen that one before?
I think I might have seen it. It's been a while, but
yeah, it's pretty well done. I mean, it's scrubbed for WWE side, because they don't make mention of how McMahon really put the pressure on Bruno to get out of the hospital bed and go fight that match. So it's just more so that he heroically got out of the hospital bed and fought the match. But I guess part of according to lore, the reason that or one of the conditions of him going into the Hall of Fame is he got paid $250,000, but it wasn't because he was trying to hijack them for money. It was because that's what Vince McMahon Sr. owed him for the Shea Stadium payoff, basically. So good on Bruno if that was the case. I mean, I'm happy that he finally at some point got that. But yeah, it's there's lots of stories out there about that lucrative deal that he signed to come back and be the champion. Perhaps he wasn't getting paid the full amount that he should have been at the time. Yeah. So you have that show with Hansen. Just unbelievable that he is able to do what he was able to do. He was only supposed to really have the title for about a year while they were trying to prep somebody to take over as champion. But of course, it's Bruno, so they're selling out again. I mean, the numbers debated. I mean, during that documentary, they said it was 187 times that he sold out MSG, and it was that the Hall of Fame was number 188. Jim Cornette has said that, not to belittle it, just more so because of modern figures and stuff like that, the number was a bit lower, but still astronomical as far as anybody else that could do that. But yeah, so we're coming to the end of his run in 77. So my question for you, so he loses the title to Superstar Billy Graham on April 30th, 1977. How was that as shocking for you as it was the Ivan Koloff loss? Was it something that you were expecting? I know the WWF was kind of taking precautions by having it out of New York and having it happen in Baltimore instead because they weren't sure how the fans were going to react. But what was your thoughts on the whole Superstar Billy Graham title win versus the Ivan Koloff title win?
I was surprised, but like not shocked like I was. I mean, I was devastated when it was Koloff. I was surprised, but although I despised Ivan Koloff, I actually liked Superstar Billy Graham. He was hard not to like because he was so charismatic and so colorful, and he had that large. I mean, that physique was out of this world. And it's so flamboyant. He couldn't wrestle, but I mean, he didn't really need to wrestle. But I tell you what, though, he could sell. He could, when he's in a match with Bruno, and even if nowadays after 30 seconds of a headlock, people say boring, but they would do that thing. They do the test of strength. Yeah. And they could lock up for like 3 minutes and they could go back and forth and nobody was saying boring. They just, they told a story and it was, and they had people on the edge of their seats.
Yeah. And I watched the match today again. I've seen it many times, but watching it, it's funny you mentioned the test of strength spot because that was one of the things that I noticed. The crowd was just wild for that spot, and I mean, you had the two strongest guys in the sport at that point going at it. So I mean, there you go. It's the immovable object against the irresistible force, right? But one thing I did notice is, yes, the fans, of course, were devastated by Bruno losing the title, but you did have that smattering of fans that was pretty excited about Billy Graham winning the title as well in the crowd. For you, did you feel like this was maybe the dawning of a new era where they're going this route with the more flamboyant Graham and stuff? Did you feel like this is maybe not so much torch passing, but it's just we're going a different route here?
Well, by this time, you had Ivan holding the title for, I think, 21 days. You had Stasiak holding the title for 9 days. I was just wondering, is this going to be another one of those deals?
Right.
And then after, I think his first title defense was at the Garden against Gorilla Monsoon the month later, I think in May of 77. And I thought for sure Gorilla Monsoon's going to win the championship. And when he pinned Monsoon in the middle of the ring, it's like, holy crap.
Right.
This guy's for real. And I tell you what, his title reign, I thought it was excellent. I mean, now you have the Ivan Putskis and you have the Mil Mascaras and you have the Dusty Rhodes, those guys, and Bruno, getting the guys who would never ever get a title shot against, a babyface champion. Now you have a heel champion and those guys are getting their title shots. I thought it was, I actually think that he deserved a longer reign.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, that Dusty Rhodes feud is just very well known. The series of matches that they had. You mentioned Gorilla. Do you think Gorilla ever should have got a run with the title himself?
No. I think no. I just when I saw the match, I thought, no, that maybe Monsoon will win. No, I never really thought of Gorilla as I don't think he even won. I don't think he ever won the tag team championship either. All those years in the company, I think he ever won a belt. Yeah.
Well, I always say it today. I was actually talking about this today with somebody, but there's certain people, they don't need a title. Like it's like their gimmick is their title. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's more so if you get a win over this person, it's almost like winning a title. Like I always thought that about the Undertaker or someone like the Fiend when Bray Wyatt was that, right? It's just, they don't even look natural holding a title. It's just more so that's your thing, right? Andre, another guy, he didn't need the title. He had the unbeaten streak and stuff like that.
No, and you talk about during Bruno's first reign. I mean, Monsoon was a huge adversary of Bruno's, and I think they actually wrestled an hour and a half draw at the Garden. And Bruno said there was one match where Bruno drop kicked Monsoon, and he actually heard his ribs crack. And it was about the 15-minute mark, and they still wrestled for another hour after that. I mean, I can't imagine wrestling with fractured ribs, but that's what they did. That's how committed they were.
He had a lot of respect for him, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so we've got Superstar Graham wins the title. Doesn't mean that Bruno goes away. He just kind of throttled down the schedule a little bit, but he had his semi-retirement, I guess you would call it, wouldn't you? Before. He had the matchup with Larry Zbyszko because his official retirement was in 1981. Right. But But he kind of was he doing the broadcasting at that point in the late 70s after losing the title?
I believe so. I liked Bruno as a broadcaster. In fact, it's funny that Nikita and I were talking about this last night, that I thought Bruno was a very good commentator, because Bruno would explain a hold and like how it hurt and like why it hurt and like why the wrestler applied it. And he really, because Vince McMahon Jr., I liked him as a broadcaster, but he didn't really, as far as the technicalities, he was no Gordon Soley as far as describing the action. He was imagine the impact, or stuff like that. But Bruno would actually describe the stuff. It was a little bit later. One of my favorite Bruno moments as a commentator was, this would have been, I guess, 87 maybe, when Randy Savage injured Ricky Steamboat. And Bruno's interviewing Savage backstage, and he goes, "You piece of slime, you happy about that?" And he starts choking Savage out. It's like, this is great. This is Bruno. Like, and I guess they went around the circuit a bit there, and that was 87. So Bruno would have been about 52 back then. But Bruno said he did not, like, after he retired after his match with George Steele in the Meadowlands in 1981. He said, as far as he was concerned, that was his official retirement. They dragged him back, and he really wasn't. I think it was more to, according to them, it was to help get David over, his son. Right. Mm-hmm. But I think in reality, they were using David to bring Bruno back.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love that memory. Actually, that's 86 would have been the year that I was seeing WWF on the regular. And one of the key feuds in 86 was, the Steamboat Savage situation, but because of Steamboat playing off the injury to the throat, it was Bruno that stepped in and had the feud with him. Yes. And I'll never forget that line, "You piece of slime."
You were happy about that.
So great.
I mean, the disgust on his face was so real. Like, it was fantastic. Like, and I just felt like, when I saw Bruno, like Bruno did a couple of Piper's Pits. Yeah. And he looked great as far as his physique. He really kept himself in shape. He did. But you could see, like, the hair, it's like very thin, and his nose was squashed, and I know he didn't want to be in there. He still did a great job, though. He
did a fantastic job. Like, that, his 86 could go down as one of his better years, because he had a phenomenal feud with Piper, few steel cage matches there. He had the feud with Savage. He had a lot of tag team matches where he's teaming with either George Steele or Tito Santana against Savage and Adrian Adonis. And just, it was nice to see Bruno have this little run. I know, again, like you said, it was more so they dragged him back into it, but it was a chance for the modern fan to still see Bruno and see why Bruno was Uno, right? That's the thing. So it was great. I mean, I was going to touch on that because, before getting that, I wanted to talk about the Zbyszko feud, because, again, another shocking moment in the history of Bruno. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you said fans more so hated Larry for what he did to Bruno. But at the time, as a fan, when you're watching this, what were your thoughts with this angle, which was very well done? I guess the history being that Larry was a protege of Bruno, so that he wanted to find a way to help get him over. But what were your thoughts on it, Benny?
Yeah, when because Larry was so quiet, didn't really speak much, didn't do many interviews. And when he said that, he wanted to wrestle Bruno, I'm thinking, man, what do you mean? You can't wrestle Bruno. I used the term good guy back then. It wasn't, the term babyface didn't really exist. Yeah. So you're both good guys. You can't wrestle each other. How's that going to work? Now, even though it had been done once before with Bruno and Pedro Che, but that was just a one-off. And to me, that I don't know that really worked, because if it did, they would have done it again, and they never did it after that. Yeah. Bruno always wrestled the heel, so I'm thinking this is kind of odd. Yeah. And I remember I would have been 24 at this time, and I kind of by now I kind of knew what the score was with wrestling. Right. But I'm still watching this, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I literally remember just, standing up and saying, "What the?" And for once, my mom wasn't in the kitchen. It's like, For once, I got a free pass. But it's like even then, like at that, I've been watching wrestling for a dozen years, and I was in shock. Like how could and Bruno was? I mean, he bled like a stuck pig.
Yeah, he did.
Bruno was great at everything except for one thing. Bruno was not a good blader. He did not blade well, and that time it was. I mean, you could see the pool of blood in the ring, and what a mess. But but then the interviews afterwards, when Bruno he went biblical, he called Larry Judas.
Right.
And it was I mean, he could have called him a bunch of things, but Judas, like the ultimate traitor. Mm-hmm. I thought that was perfect. And then Larry, to his credit, really stepped his game up. He became a decent heel. I thought anyway. Yeah. Not so much like again, physically. To me, he couldn't stack up with Bruno, but but at least on the mic, he did pretty well for himself. And I mean, look what it propelled him to. He went to Atlantic, he went to Georgia, became the AWA champion twice. Now he's a WWE Hall of Famer. Actually, my favorite Hall of Fame acceptance speech, was Larry thanking Bruno for what he did for him.
Yeah, because it was Bruno the what was it? He did the speech for him to introduce him, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know who inducted Larry. I don't know if it was Bruno or not, but Larry, when he did his acceptance speech, he thanked Bruno. He said, "From the bottom of my heart," because I mean, literally, Larry Zbyszko as a teenager crawled through Bruno's hedges when Bruno was out sunning himself, and he said, "I just want to say hello," and then. I guess after a while, Bruno was such a good guy. Here he is, like the world's champion, probably like the most popular wrestler on the planet. And he's, now he's teaching this kid how to lift weights, and he befriended Larry. I mean, he did everything for Larry. It really was what it was portrayed on TV. It was a pupil, student pupil, like a mentorship.
Oh, for sure, yeah, definitely. And it's funny, Benny, like. So I'm watching. I mean, I watched wrestling in the early '80s because of, but I'm watching local stuff. It's the maritime wrestling and stuff like that. But in the mid '80s, I'm watching WWF. I'm watching AWA and stuff like that. So that's my introduction to Larry Zbyszko in the mid '80s, where he's just that stalling, annoying heel, right? The spudhead guy, all that stuff, right? And I'm like, God, I couldn't stand this guy, which meant he was good at his job, of course.
Yeah, he was a good heel.
Oh yeah, but this was the beauty. This is the beauty of things like this, where you get introduced to what their what their beginning in the wrestling scene was. And I mean, I grew to appreciate Larry Zbyszko so much more once I learned the history of Larry Zbyszko, and he was involved in one of the greatest heel turns of all time. And a lot of people fail to mention it, unfortunately, when you're listing those lists nowadays. But I mean, it started off the decade of the 80s. Larry Zbyszko, doing that to Bruno Sammartino, the living legend, and then Larry eventually called himself the living legend and stuff like that. It was so great, and that feud went on nearly the whole year of 1980.
It did, and I honestly think that I guess Larry left after that because of a dispute with money with Vince Sr. I really think if Larry had not done that, he might have been able to, maybe they would have put the title on him from Backlund, and then had another like Bruno Larry feud. Who knows? I mean, anything could have happened.
That would have been very interesting for sure.
Yes.
So there's another protege of Bruno's that I wanted to mention that I didn't even realize until more recently, and probably thanks to you guys, but Johnny Valiant. I mean, Johnny Valiant is a protege. Like, he literally went up and knocked on Bruno's door and wanted to learn how to get into wrestling. And I was always trying to connect the dots with, WrestleMania 1, which I'm glad Bruno made an appearance at, because it's the first WrestleMania. You got to have your Babe Ruth of wrestling there, but you have David Sammartino with Bruno Sammartino against Brutus Beefcake with luscious Johnny Valiant. But it turns out there is a connection there, because they not only, he was his protege. I mean, he got the Valiant brothers into the WWWF. He dropped the titles that they have, the tag team title that he held with the Crusher in
the Bruiser in Indianapolis.
In
Yeah,
Bruiser, sorry,
WWA championships.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a big connection there. But your thoughts on Luscious Johnny Valiant?
Oh, I mean, I first saw him would have been like maybe in the early 70s as John L. Sullivan. That
Right.
He was kind of like a mid-carder, prelim to mid-carder in the WWF, and then I guess he made his star in the WWA in Indianapolis. And that's another thing about Bruno. People don't realize how many guys Bruno brought in to the WWF. Like Bruno saw Bob Duncombe wrestle in Japan. He told Vince Sr., I can make money with this guy. Brought in Duncombe. He saw Toru Tanaka, I believe, in Hawaii. Same thing. He saw George Steele. I think he was doing a shot for the Sheik in Detroit, and George Steele was wrestling as the student.
Right.
And he brought him in. And I don't know if Bruno gave him his name or somebody in Pittsburgh gave him his name, but then he worked with he worked with George in Pittsburgh, and then of course, like they went at each other for years. So he was a very good, and plus, like you said, he brought in Johnny Valiant. He brought Larry Zbyszko into the business. He had a good mind for the business, and he had a good eye for talent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and obviously, a lot of people made a lot of money in the wrestling business thanks to Bruno Sammartino.
Well, and that's something else I want to mention real quick before I forget. JJ Dillon was a referee back in the day before he became a manager, and I guess there was a match he wrestled in Boston where, like, as the referee, he had to get color, and I guess when he got his payoff from Vince Sr., he went to Bruno, and he said, I really thought I was going to get a little bit more than this because of what I did. I mean, typically referee's not going to get color, especially back then. Right. And Bruno said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Next thing you know, I guess the next time JJ refereed, he got an envelope and it had a few $100 in it. Bruno didn't have to do that, but Bruno always stuck up for the boys, make sure that the boys were taken care of. So, I mean, he had their utmost love and respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Benny, I wanted to get to your story about meeting Bruno finally as a lifelong fan. One of the things that I loved in your article that you had in Pro Wrestling Stories, you talked about Buddy Holly, the death of Buddy Holly, how that was the day the music died. La Bamba is one of my all-time favorite movies, to be quite honest.
What's his name? Lou Diamond Phillips.
Diamond Phillips. Yeah, Isai Morales. Just great movie, right? But love that. But the day the music died, it was obviously the plane crash that killed Richie Valens and Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. But you referred to Bruno retiring as the day that wrestling died. So for you, did you keep up with wrestling as much then, or because it was starting to transition into the rock and wrestling era and stuff like that? Which, I mean, obviously that's what hooked me. But for you, for a fan that's watching it since the '60s and the '70s and the classics and stuff like that, was that kind of where everything kind of tailed off for you, or do you even still keep up with it today and stuff like that, or what was it?
Yeah, I do, but more because of podcasting. Like, I'm going to be on a 4-hour WrestleMania prediction show on Saturday morning. So, but I said it on my Wednesday podcast. I feel bad because nobody is ever going to watch wrestling now with the same feeling in here that I did when I watched it, back as a kid. So, I mean, when Bruno retired, coincidentally, was right around the time my first son was born in 1983. My second was born in 1985. And, wrestling was changing. Bruno was gone. So everything kind of happened to me for a reason. And even though I would keep up with it, it just wasn't the same anymore. I had the reason that I got into wrestling as a fan was gone. And so, I mean, I never, ever would go a year without watching wrestling. I might go a month or two. But I typically would watch the pay-per-views, a couple a year, usually buy WrestleMania. I'd still buy the magazines once in a while. But yeah, it just wasn't the same.
Yeah. I get you. I mean, even myself, like I have a hard time. I watch with my son, mostly the WWE, but and I'm the same way. Like watching it. That's why I do this talking about the 80s is because watching it back then, to me, it felt real at that point, even though it had gone a little bit more cartoony. But I mean, I more so look at stuff like when I watch Jim Crockett Promotions or the Mid-South Wrestling and stuff like that, and it just feels so nice to watch something where it looks like a struggle, where people are actually trying to win,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it makes sense. But occasionally there will be something that comes up that gets my attention that, kind of pulls me back to that time a little bit. I know it's hard to these days, but like for instance, like even the Brock Lesnar Obafemi situation that we got going on,
Yeah.
that feels old school to me. Like I am anticipating that match. I want to see that match. Even that Liv Morgan Stephanie Vaquer situation, that feels like there's a little bit of true heat in there.
They have done the build for those two matches very, very well. Now, Seth Rollins and Gunther, it happened out of necessity because each of their opponents was injured, but they didn't really haven't had a lot of time to build it. But no, Liv and Stephanie and Oba and Brock, yes, great builds. And I do. To me, those are the two hardest matches to predict too.
Right. Yeah. I think Oba's got to go over though on Brock. He must.
Well, it's funny. I am going to predict Brock, and the only reason why I'm going to predict because the way I see it is that Gunther's going to beat Seth Rollins, and then I guess because Paul Heyman owes him a favor, and then the favor is going to be that he wrestles Brock at his retirement match at SummerSlam, and I just think you can't have Brock lose two matches in a row. So I think you got to keep Brock strong because it's going to mean a lot more. You're going to have a lot more anticipation. Like, can Gunther really can he do this? So I think for that reason, Brock has to go over, which is really a shame because in any other case, 100% Obafemi has to go over.
So that's interesting because I've got the same thought process with that, Benny, but I'm kind of a little bit opposite on the Brock thing. I feel like Brock losing is kind of Paul Heyman's excuse to feed him to Gunther. You know what I mean? Like, I'm putting you out the pasture, that type of thing, and I'm feeding you to the career killer. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from as well. But I feel like Brock is kind of indestructible as far as his win-loss record because he just has to go and destroy 20 security guards, and you realize this guy's an animal every time. But I either way, that match is probably the most anticipated match I have.
When you mentioned old school, to me, like Gunther you could put Gunther in a time machine.
Yeah.
And you could fly him back to any territory in the 60s or the 70s, and he would have been an on-top guy. WWF, Mid-South, Portland, Texas, you name Missouri, Houston. He's going to be an on-top guy because he's really that good. I love the guy. I mean, I think he does great work.
Yeah. Wouldn't Bruno have loved to have had him to go against him?
Yes. and he's he's a hateable heel. He makes you hate him, which, nowadays is pretty tough.
Yeah, well, it is. But, instead of standing there and having the crowd sing your song as a heel, maybe just tell them to shut up or turn the music off or something, right? It can be done. But yeah, I have so many things about the modern stuff that I could go on. But yeah, it's there are some shining lights at times. And as I say, those matches.
Moments, and I'll be watching WrestleMania.
Oh, yes. It's a tradition. You got to do it, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, Benny, I want to hear your story about meeting Bruno because the article itself is great, but I want to hear you tell it because it's an amazing, I guess, an amazing series of events. And you mentioned to me off air about how you have someone looking over you, and that's probably what's leading to that. But yeah, it just let the folks know because this is fantastic for someone who. I mean, you've obviously shown it through this episode, but Bruno was it for you. So let's hear this.
I guess it would have been like maybe late September of 2017. Bruno's birthday was October 6th. So I posted a birthday tribute to Bruno on my Facebook page. And I have a friend, his name is Mike Miggett. He's from Johnstown City, Pennsylvania. He became a very close friend of Bruno's. And the way it happened, and he's a little bit younger than I am, and he was more of a Bruno fan, Bruno's second run, but he runs a printing shop in Johnstown City. And I guess Bruno needed some posters or something. And Mike did them for him. And Bruno said, "How much do I owe you?" He said, "I'm not going to charge you, Bruno. You're my hero." And they actually, forged a true friendship. In fact, Mike went to Italy with Bruno's last time to Italy. And so when I posted it, Mike said to me, I'm taking Bruno out for his birthday next week. Would you mind if I read him your tribute? I said, "Would I mind?" And I'm thinking to myself, "Yeah, sure. Like, you're going to forget, but I thought I would be honored." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, don't be surprised if Bruno calls you." I said, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way he's going to call me. So that night, now I was actually living in Minneapolis at the time, and I was working at a Nissan dealership as a finance manager. And, weekdays would get like right around 6 o'clock was like crazy busy every night, every single night. Well, somebody was watching over me because at 6 o'clock, my cell phone rings, and it was Mike. It was Mike's number. And Mike said, "I have somebody who wants to talk to you." And I thought it was going to be a rib, maybe somebody said, "You piece of slime." But the minute he spoke, and I will never, ever forget what he said to me. He said, "Benny, where did you learn to write those beautiful words?" Oh, and wow. I said to him, "Bruno, when you write from the heart, it's easy." And, then we just chatted for about, it seemed 5 or 10 minutes. In my mind, I was 12 years old all over again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't even remember what I said. Hopefully I didn't make a fool out of myself, but I was so nervous. This is my hero, right? So about a week later, Mike said to me, "Bruno really liked you." I said, "Well, I'm glad." And he said, he's having a Christmas dinner at Rico's, his favorite Italian restaurant. And it gave me the date. He said, would you want to attend? It's like, would I want to attend? Are you kidding me? I swear to you, within an hour, I had my plane ticket bought. I had a hotel room reserved, and I got my PTO approved at my job. There was, you know what? Even if they hadn't approved it, I would have went anyway. Yeah, there's nothing stopping me from this. And so yeah, that was literally one of the best nights of my entire life. I flew to Pittsburgh, and Dominic DiNucci was the first person that walked in. And I introduced myself. I said, "Can I buy you a glass of wine?" He says, "No, but I'll take a cup of coffee." And we literally chatted for about 20 minutes about wrestling. And he initially started wrestling in Montreal as Dominic Bravo, and his partner was Dino Bravo, but not the same Dino Bravo, different Dino Bravo. Mm-hmm. Not the one. In fact, my true crime episode this last Monday was about Dino Bravo. I just watched it. It was great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And but then Bruno, it was a black, I think, Mercedes, and his wife was driving, and it's like, oh my God, this is really happening. The whole night was surreal. I've never seen so much wine consumed in a single night. And so Dominic was there. There was a local reporter from Pittsburgh. I can't think of his name now. It was Larry something. And Bruno's wife, Mike, was there with his mom, and Donnie Iris. I don't know if you know who Donnie Iris is. Yep. Love is Like a Rock, Aaliyah. And he was also the lead singer for the Jaggers back in the day. He was there. In fact, he was wearing a Pirates jacket. We talked about the 1960 World Series because I'm a baseball nut too. Yeah. He said, you guys stole that one from us. It was just, and then I was making good money at the car dealership. This whole little vacation cost me a fortune, but obviously the memories it provided were priceless. Yeah. And I get out my Amex card. I'm thinking, my tab's at least $300. Somebody said, "Don't worry, it's already paid for." It's like, okay. The wine alone had to be like several $1,000s. Yeah. It was good. It wasn't stuff you buy at, the grocery store. This was top shelf stuff. Yeah. But yeah, and then, sadly, Mike was the one who called me on the morning of April 18th when Bruno passed away. Just 4 months later, and Bruno did look very frail.
Yeah.
At the dinner, I mean, he was, his hands were kind of swollen, and it was sad because, like, to me, like, but he was still Superman to me. Yeah, but he was getting on. He was 80. I guess he was 82.
82. Yep.
Yeah, when he passed. But yeah, it's just a shame. He apparently the illnesses he contracted as a youth in Italy, the rheumatic fever, did enough damage to his heart that that's what wound up doing him in later on.
Right. And did you I think you mentioned in the article you got to read the tribute again to him in person?
I actually read him a different tribute.
A different one, okay.
I wrote a different one. I have it somewhere. I have it on my computer here. And I mean, it literally took me about 3 or 4 minutes, and I was trembling. I mean, I was so nervous. Like, to me, it's like, this is a dream come true. This is surreal. I mean, really had to pinch myself. And but I said, I remember the last line I said was, Bruno, take what I just told you and multiply it by several million, and that's what you meant to all of us.
Right.
And he just said, oh my God. I mean, and you could tell he was literally touched.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was, yeah, it was like my sister always said, my mom is our guardian angel, and she made that all happen. I said, well, if she did, one day I'll thank her for it, because it was a dream come true.
Just amazing stuff. And it's so cool. You pretty much got to represent all the Bruno fans in how you did the tribute to him too.
Right. And then, I was friends with JP Zarka, the editor of the Pro Wrestling Stories. And he I told him I like to write. And he said, well, why don't you write about your dinner with Bruno?
Mm-hmm.
And I did. That would have been like probably later in 2018. And then I was off to the races as far as writing.
Yeah.
I was writing, at one point I was writing maybe a story every month, every 2 months, but I picked all the, like, Cicluna, Dominic DiNucci, Bruno, Ivan Koloff. Well, mostly, the wrestlers of my youth. Although my most widest read story, believe it or not, is about Katie Vick.
Oh, God. Of course.
The last time I checked, that had over 250,000 views.
Oh my God. Of course. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think, like, and when I first pitched JP, he says, no, nobody will read that. I said, no, I have a feeling. I said, if I do it right, he said, and it just exploded. And yeah, I mean, of all the things, like the stories I'm proudest of, like, don't have 1/10 of the reads that Katie Vick has. But that's kind of the society we live on. We live in, rather. We sensationalize things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Just before we get going here, Benny, I know I've been taking a ton of your time, but I so appreciate this. This has been phenomenal. Can I ask you about a few wrestlers that I've always been a pretty big fan of, and also it's from that early 80s era that maybe people don't appreciate as much, but really is the backbone of what led to the rock and wrestling side of things when WWF was really growing, when you had the gap between Bruno and then your Hogan era. Number one, can you give maybe your thoughts on Bob? I don't need you to, don't worry about having to go into a 10-minute diatribe or anything like that, but just for the fans that, because Bob Backlund is kind of like a polar thing for some people. Some people are, he's just howdy doody, whatever, this kind of stuff. Other people like swear by Bob Backlund because he really was a legit badass as far as being able to wrestle and stuff like that. For the fan that's not familiar with Bob Backlund, or just really has that they haven't taken the time to look into his title run as well, which was a very historic run. He defeated superstar Billy Graham. He held that title for 5 years. What would you say about Bob Backlund?
It's funny, growing up with Bruno, then Pedro, then Bruno, I didn't know if I was going to be ready for Bob Backlund because it was a polar shift in direction. Yeah. But I tell you what, I absolutely love Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund was a phenomenal wrestler, a phenomenal champion, a phenomenal human being. And you talk about, I always, when people post on Facebook, who would you want, which wrestlers, if you were in a crowd at a dark alley, who would you want with you? I always say Haku, Haku, Harley Race, and Bob Backlund. People don't realize how tremendously strong that guy was. And, we've covered, Nikita and I have covered a lot of Garden cards from, 79, 80, 81. And I'll always rewatch the matches if they're available to prepare for the, the show.
Yeah.
Bob Backlund was over big time. People say, well, the cards were padded. No, they weren't. I mean, Bob Backlund could carry, the company, and he did. And I mean, the cards were, maybe they were stacked, but I mean, they were stacked for Bruno too.
Yeah.
People want to see, they don't want to just see one wrestling match. They want to see 7 or 8 good matches.
Yeah.
And, Bob Backlund, and now towards the end, it kind of got a little bit old, and then once Vince Jr. bought the company, you knew that he was going to be history.
Right.
And, but to his credit, 10 years later, he reinvented himself as Mr. Backlund, which was an absolutely phenomenal character. People,
it was.
I think that is a very underrated heel character. And the funny thing is, everything he said was absolutely true.
Yeah, it's the best part about a heel. They're justifiable in their actions, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
When he talked about people not knowing their history and their presidents, I mean, the focus had shifted from education. He was absolutely right. Just the way he delivered his material would infuriated people. But I'm glad. I wish it had been a little bit longer. I'm glad they gave him the title again. He only held it 6 days, I think, before he dropped it to Kevin Nash. But Bob Backlund in the late 70s, he was the bomb. He was the real deal. People absolutely, they didn't love him the same way they loved Bruno, but nobody was going to be loved like Bruno was loved.
Right.
It was a different kind, but people really respected him. And you watch his matches, like you watch the match where he beat Graham for the title. Nobody manhandled Billy Graham like Bob. Even Bruno didn't manhandle Billy Graham like Bob Backlund did. You watch him against Arion. He could just do it. I mean, he could have done whatever he wanted. I guess there was a story one time that Angelo Mosca tried to shoot on him, and Bob very quickly corrected the situation. I mean, nobody was going to shoot on Bob Backlund and get away with it.
And that was one of the big reasons why they made him champ too, right?
Anybody going to business for themselves, they were going to be hurting.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm great. I'm glad that you're able to shed some light on that, because I don't think the WWF or WWE did him any favors in how they portrayed him. And you always just see the end run of Bob Backlund and stuff like that when I guess maybe the fans were ready for that switch to Hogan and stuff, but really, he was such a pivotal part of the WWF.
I mean, and people say, well, he was born. He was soft-spoken, but back then, the stories were told mostly in the ring.
Yes.
And, his matches with Pat Patterson, like they're works of art.
Yeah. Yeah, another guy I wanted to get your opinion on, too. I left a comment on one of your videos about Greg Valentine. I said that he could have easily been both NWA World Champion and WWF World Champion in his late 70s, early 80s run. But your thoughts on Greg Valentine? Oh,
one of the best ever. And, what a legacy. His father, Johnny Valentine, one of the best ever, unfortunately was in that plane crash. But, Greg he legit looked like a badass. And he could wrestle. He could work. When he broke Chief's leg, I'm surprised something didn't happen to him. I could have easily seen him if he beat Bob Backlund. I turned on the TV and he said, they said Greg Valentine is the new, WWF champion. I wouldn't have been shocked at all. If somebody said that Greg Valentine beat Flair and was the NWA champion, I wouldn't have been the least bit surprised. The guy was that good.
Yeah, believable.
Totally believable. And he was a great worker. He knew what he was doing. He came from that legacy, of his dad. No, and he could, he wasn't like the greatest talker, but he wasn't bad on the mic either. And again, back then you had a Grand Wizard or a Fred Blassie or a Lou Albano. That was that was the formula. If you were a little bit weak on the mic, you had a great manager to talk for.
Yeah, that wasn't a problem back then. You had some of the best in the business there.
Oh, absolutely.
Another one for me, I always say that, he again, another guy that easily could have been WWF champ, could have been NWA champ. but to me, he was the MVP of the WWF from 81 to 84 before the Hogan era came in. It's Don Morocco. What are your thoughts on Don Morocco?
I knew who you were going to say before you said it.
Yeah.
And absolutely correct. Another guy that, if he had beat Backlund, it wouldn't have surprised me at all. He could have pretty much been on top. I mean, and he was on top everywhere he went. And that he was very, I mean, first of all, he had the build, incredible physique.
Yeah.
But he was a great worker and he could talk. One of my favorite matches ever was a TV match where he beats an enhancement talent guy while eating a meatball sandwich. Yeah, how do you beat that? I mean, especially for an Italian guy, like, man, he's eating a meatball sandwich and he won his match.
My favorite part about that match is Albano slipping on the meatball sub. Oh man, that was so good. And Morocco, just the opposite of Valentine. His promos were just so good.
He was very, and I mean, even those skits he did with Fuji later on, they were priceless.
Oh, it's great.
He was a very rare talent. I like, and his work with Piper in Georgia, where he got Piper over as a babyface.
Yeah,
he was just one of those very rare talents. We were so blessed to have like all these people to watch back then.
Oh, definitely. The last one I got for you, just quickly, Benny, Jimmy Snuka. Your thoughts on Jimmy Snuka at that time? Because you're seeing him, people. I know. Let's put aside the stuff that happened outside the squared circle, but seeing, because you weren't aware of that at the time, but seeing him as the phenom that he was.
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the most emotional moments ever on TV. One obviously Bruno and Larry, because that was more like anger. But when Buddy Rogers had Albano and Jimmy Snuka, and he said, "Jimmy, you have no money."
Mm-hmm.
And and Albano walked away, and then Snuka, "Buddy, would you be my man?" I mean, because Snuka rarely said anything.
Yeah,
and they embraced, and it was really a really special moment.
Yeah,
and man, oh man, you talk about a guy that was over with the fans, and no, he was just a phenomenal talent. He, unfortunately, drugs were his demon too. I think if they weren't, I think they would have given him at the very least an IC title run, and who knows, maybe a world title run. I mean, he was that over with the fans. He could have carried the torch there for a while.
Yeah, with a mouthpiece for sure, he could have easily done that.
Yeah, same thing. You might need a baby face, like an Arnold Skolin type.
Yeah. But I mean, everybody always refers to the Roddy Piper feud because of obviously what happened on Piper's Pit, but really that more so got Piper over than Snuka. But I always refer to the Morocco Snuka feud and that one incident where Snuka comes flying over the top rope on top of Morocco on the floor. It's just, again, these are things you guys weren't seeing back then, right? It's not like it happened every day. And of course, him hitting that Superfly splash on Morocco off the top of the cage. I mean, it's just an epic moment.
We were blessed. To me, those days was the absolute best time to be a fan. And what I tell everybody is, when you go to see a wrestling event now, you by and large, you're going to be entertained.
Yeah.
We didn't look at it that way. When I went to the Nassau Coliseum or the Island Garden or the Sunnyside Garden, I was going to watch people fight.
Yep.
Big difference. And I mean, they enjoy it now. And I understand, society's evolved. And I sometimes wonder, could wrestling have maintained kayfabe with all the changes in technology? I don't know if it could have or not. All I know is that it was much better for me when it was real.
I agree. I agree with you. And I always say, we got a lot of technology, but we still see some kayfabe slip by sometimes with some of these feuds. Look at, again, we just referenced it, Brock and Oba. You would believe that there's some real heat between those guys and stuff like that. It's just, if you put the effort in, I think you can certainly, maybe not for everything, but you can certainly make it a lot more real, as you say.
Yeah. Kudos to those guys. I mean, Oba Femi's, and that's one where my heart wants him to win.
Yeah.
But I I just think that with, well, you have to look at the whole big picture, and the fact that Gunther's going to win at WrestleMania. He's going to beat Seth Rollins. He's going to ask Paul Heyman for a favor. The favor is going to be that he wants to do Lesnar's retirement match. And I don't know if you want Brock going into his retirement match looking weak, because then it's then you kind of think, well, Oba beat him, so Gunther's going to beat him. Well, you kind of still want that element of suspense. Otherwise, I would pick Oba 100 out of 100 times to win that match.
Yeah, it's nice though when you can question it. That's a nice thing. You said you talked about when it was real, Benny. So before we get going here, I want you to promote all your stuff. Let everybody know where they can find you, because they need to find you guys for sure.
Yeah, thank you. So on Monday night at 6:00, True Crime of the Bad Girl, The Playa, and Dangerous Dave on the Playa Entertainment Network. I also simulcast it on Want Radio, and the same thing on Wednesday for When It Was Real at 7:30. Both on the Playa Entertainment Network and Want Radio. And then Sundays, I have to, to me, it's become my new love, doing my show on Sunday at 3:00. I morph into Benny the Jet, which is, and I play the oldies. And I don't just play the oldies. I mean, I'll do research on some of the artists. I just won't spin records. Like, as an example, like the name of my show this Sunday is called Dreaming. It's all songs, with dreams in the title, Sweet Dreams.
Yep.
And like I was going to play, I am going to play I Like Dreaming by Kenny Nolan, which was in 1977. And I was going to say, yeah, there's that one-hit wonder, Kenny Nolan. But Kenny Nolan actually was a very prolific songwriter. And he wrote a couple of songs, but he wrote My Eyes Adored You, which Frankie Valli had a huge hit with. So I always try to do that little extra to, bring out those little fun facts that people might not know. It's a labor of love, though. I for a 2-hour show, it probably takes me 4 or 5 hours to prep for it. But to me, it's well worth it. I don't even get paid for it. My secret desire is, maybe there's like some radio scout listening. It's like, well, we have to have that guy. But you know what? If not, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I'm really happy doing it.
Hey, man, if it brings a smile to your face, that's all that matters,
well,
right?
And I'll get the occasional, somebody like a Facebook message, I was really having a bad day, but you playing those songs picked me up. And that, to me, that's what life is all about. If you can, anywhere you go, like I go to this place called Grandma Sally's every morning for breakfast. Yep. I'll purposely tell a joke, because that might be the one time people laugh that day. And so if you can make anybody's day, just one person, better, it's a good thing. And that's what I try to do with the radio show.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Growing up, my favorite comedy TV show was WKRP in Cincinnati. So I think that's the whole reason I do the podcast thing, is I have that secret desire to be, to be Johnny Fever or something
I like when Les Nessman would do the traffic report and he'd beat his chest so it sounded like a helicopter.
I know. It's great. Oh, that's such a great show. Except I turned into Herb Tyler because I'm doing insurance. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Benny. Before we go, if you could leave one final thought on Bruno Sammartino and what he meant to the wrestling industry, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, he was just, like I said, he was not even once in a generation. He might have been like a once in a 100 years person. I mean, he took his championship so seriously. I mean, you never saw him in public without a suit and tie. He said if he went to a restaurant and he's having a glass of wine and he saw like a kid approach, I mean, he wouldn't drink it. He really wanted people to look up to him. He wasn't full of himself. The thing that, people love about Bruno, he was just so humble, because he came from when you really know his story and how he grew up and how close to death he came so many times, and even how he came to this country, meeting his father at 15 years old, being picked on because he couldn't speak English, and he was an 83-pound weakling, like the old magazine, the cover of the magazine, the 98-pound weakling at the beach.
Yeah,
that was
Charles Schultz, Charles Atlas.
To have lifted himself up and to have accomplished what he did, and all the while never losing sight of who he was and what he meant to people. To me, there was two people I wanted to meet in my entire life. One was Gary Puckett. I don't know if you know who Gary Puckett is. Gary Puckett,
singer, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I met him about 5 years before I met Bruno. I was working at a home show, and he was walking down the aisle, and I thought, at first, because I hadn't seen him in years, I thought, man, that guy looks familiar. All of a sudden, the light bulb went on off in my head, and I left my booth, and I said, "Aren't you Gary Puckett?" And I shook hands with him. We chatted for about 10 minutes. Nicest guy. About 6 months later, he was playing in Clearwater, Florida. I had seen him in Long Island. I saw him in Long Island in 1969 when I was 14. I saw him 44 years later in downtown Clearwater. Just like life went full circle. And the other person I wanted to meet was Bruno. And so I got to meet both of the people that I looked up to the most, and they were both like absolute princes of men. So I'm because they say be careful. When you meet your heroes, you might be disappointed. Not me. I could not have picked better choices.
That's awesome. That's completely awesome. Thanks so much, Benny. I really appreciate you coming on and joining me and talking about this such an important topic. I thank all the people that follow the channel for their support. I hope they go and support you as well and follow you and subscribe. If you want to see more from Wrestling with the 80s, head on over to Facebook and check out the Wrestling with the 80s Facebook page over there, or go on to Instagram with Wrestling with the 80s. But and make sure you support Benny and Nikita and all the stuff that Benny's doing as well. And I'll make sure to put links for the channel. I'll put it for Pro Wrestling Stories as well, and for Want Radio too, so that you have it there. But Benny, again, thank you very much, folks. If you can, please try to keep old school wrestling alive, because it's just the best. Hey, we're both sitting here still talking about this stuff today. There's a reason for that.
I will until my last breath. I'm sure you will too.
I will too, for sure. Anyways, thank you very much, folks. Have a great evening.